What's going on, Mark, man? We've had a nice little intermission.
Yeah, we had to take some breaks. Had
Yeah,
some
well,
life of
eh,
stuff going on that trumped getting together and making these videos.
that's okay. The whole thing about reef therapy is it's supposed to be on our own terms and still keep it fun. So don't ever want to make it feel like a job for either of us, because then it just won't really come across as authentic, which I think is what a lot of people respond to. Just the
Yeah.
nice general reef chat, and sometimes accompanied by some deep reef aquarium discussions.
Well, I had, even though we didn't record one the other week, I enjoyed, I listened to you on Reef Bum.
Yeah.
And yeah, I enjoyed that talk. So it was like nice. I got my Jake fix for the week, indirectly. I
That was a
wasn't conversing
long
with
one,
you,
right?
but yeah, you guys
That
went
was
deep.
that was
I enjoyed
three
it.
hours long. Yeah. No, it's awesome to have those conversations with professionals, but it's really important, and it's just something I repeated multiple times, that Chris is a commercial coral farmer, and the things that people are doing at the frontier of knowledge and understanding and experience is not something that translate one to one to just someone who wants a decent reef tank in their home and just have some corals looking nice. So you don't always have to step on the gas and drive 100 miles per hour to have happy, thriving corals.
Yeah, agreed. And I think when, if you're in the business of farming corals, I mean, sort of like on my job, right? It's like the risk, you're a little more cautious. You have to be a little more careful. You can certainly experiment on the side with tanks and stuff, but like the larger systems, you want to go with like known truths, because you don't want an experiment to go wrong and impact your business either. So I imagine those guys are a little more careful, right? They're not as no,
I
you
don't know.
disagree?
When you get used to kind of like pushing the envelope and breaking the rules, I mean, I think every time that I've come up or got interested in like a new technique or a new method, I've almost always overdone it. I've almost always overdone it, and then kind of pulled back. Like I was pushing my pH, and then right when I got to 8.5, it just something just didn't look right across the board. Not bad, but I was like, all right, you know what? I think 8.4 is enough. I think 8.4 is enough. And I think every trace element I've ever tried, it just probably went a little too far and then pulled it back. But I don't know. That's kind of how you learn the boundaries.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm bad with hand dosing, because I treat it like I'm cooking food. I'm like, a little more is okay, a little more, and I've certainly overdone it with additives when I was manually dosing a lot of that stuff. And I learned my lesson, especially like with amino acids and stuff. Like, when you've dosed too many of those.
I actually have not. I
No,
haven't. No.
I
One time when I was working at Unique, an intern, set up a dosing pump, a single channel. It was cheap. It wasn't even like very controllable, like the pumps we have today. And I think it siphoned.
oh shoot.
And I think the big gallon jug went into a 2,000-gallon system. The only thing you could tell was just a tiny extra bacterial film on the sides of the walls. That was it.
I've had, I mean, there's a reason I like specific amino acids, because they're a little more, for me, tolerant of overdosing. But then I've tried some other amino acids, and I won't mention brand names, but like there's definitely some algae fuel in there. Like I was like, oh, okay, something's fueling the algae and not just the corals. I don't know what it is, but I do notice a difference. Like Salifert, like you could just dose the hell out of that, in my experience.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Two Little Fishies, I feel like, is a pretty good one to dose with. Doesn't really
Yeah,
harm
those. I
much.
mean, there's a lot of amino acids, and it's not really doing anybody any favors when everybody just calls them amino acids, because
Yeah.
they have different recipes. Saying there's amino acids in their additive is just like saying there's stuff. Here's our bottle of stuff. I don't even know how many thousands of amino acids there are, but yeah, that's not super helpful, and it doesn't help you compare from one tank or from one manufacturer to the next. So So you're going to be out here, man, in just a few days. I am so
Yeah,
excited about that. Like, we're going to talk about a few things, but you're going to get to see it for yourself. I don't know, sometime next week.
I'm looking forward to that. I really am.
Yep.
It's fun to like have seen, because the last time I visited you in Colorado, you hadn't had the studio set up yet, and so to see all these videos and see you building it out remotely through YouTube like everybody else, it'll be fun to see it with your own eyes and kind of put it all together. Like, oh, okay, yeah. So, and I know how you are, so I know that there's like YouTube, like the videos that you've made is like probably just like a snippet of the cool stuff that's there, So
I
it'll
think I
be
could spend all of my time documenting things that are here, and by the time I got finished, there'd be new things popping up and new things growing and new observations. But I did get a couple really awesome animals this week. Really freaking awesome. And this is one of those cases where I think there's a newer generation of reefers who maybe don't understand the great attention to detail about coral species, right? I'm just never going to get over it, right? I'm never going to get over it when I see coral vendors selling Acanthastria echinata, Acanthastria rotundiflora, Acanthastria subechinata, Acanthastria hemphrici. They're all enchinadas. I'm just like, no, they're not. It doesn't matter as much, but you can't appreciate the differences. And so one of the corals that I got this week, I got two things from my good friend Taka up in Boulder. He's been our Japanese correspondent for Reef Builders for, like a decade, I think. He gave me a foot-long colony of Acropora tutwilensis.
dang.
Do you remember that coral?
Yeah.
When I see that coral, I'm just like transported to Reefer Madness and Chris Tournier, because at the time, man, he was so ahead of his time, cherry picking corals, and he saw that the Acropora tutwilensis is just like this horizontally tabling staghorn, like such a weird table acro. They come in from the wild, and they used to come in a lot more, obviously, when Fiji was going. But I know they do occur in Indonesia, and they do occur in Australia. But man, like Fiji was definitely the place for them. And his specimen is tank grown, so he took like a wild chunk and grew it out to about a foot long, and it's solid. It's just a solid table with weird perforated branches at the tips. Nice.
So where
nice
did you put it?
I put it in the Acropora system with a ton of light and a ton of flow. He was growing under
one of the
metal
shallow
halides.
pools, or
One of the shallow tanks. But that's such a freaking cool coral. I'm gonna probably lop off a wedge, just to kind of spread it out because it's so big. It's not super manageable. But yeah, it's just everything I always remembered. Kind of a jade green acro with a pink growth margin, and then the growth margin is kind of peppered in green coralites and green polyps, similar to an efflow, but not an efflow at all.
I need to see pictures of that.
Well, I would send you pictures, but you're going to see it next week anyway.
Yeah.
So I think I might do a write-up on it, because this is one of those cases, like, if you didn't know, you just think it was kind of a random, densely growing table acro, right? And under, I guess, optimized conditions, it should grow back into like a tabling staghorn. Super neat.
Yeah.
And then the other thing he gave me was a golden hamlet. And that is one of those species that is actually, it's weird because it ranges all over the Caribbean, but it doesn't, there's nowhere you can go to get one, right? Like divers just have to come across it. It's on the cover of the Paul Human series of Caribbean identification books. So you got one for corals, one for fish, and one for creatures, and it's even the logo of the company. So it's a bright yellow, like mini grouper with a kind of black front of the head with a blue outline. Oh my lord! Like you can't call up anyone and ask for it. You just have to be Johnny on the spot if one shows up on a Caribbean suppliers list. And Taka was on it, man. He found it, and he's had it for 6 months, and he gave it to me as a wedding gift.
So dumb question, because I mean I was always familiar with them, and I just assumed it was like a deep water morph that, and that's why it's so rare. But when I've gone scuba diving, I've seen the indigo hamlets around diving. So is it just, you know, what is it that makes it just randomly pop up but be so discreet and yet at the same time still be successful as a species?
Here's the funny part. There are like 12 or 13 described species of Hypoplectrus hamlets, and there are no genetic markers between them.
What?
They don't have any differences
So
in
it's
scale counts. They don't have any differences in pectoral and fin rays. And in some of the literature, they literally call them morphs. And there are some hybrids, but you still see, like mostly when they pair up with the same color. And so yeah, it's such a strange fish that is a really interesting research subject for geneticists trying to understand evolution, because they've thrown a bunch of theories at why these fish are different colors, but don't seem to fit the mold for typically different species.
Right.
There's a couple populations that can be found in concentration. So I think like the yellowtail is common around Florida. Butter hamlet's common everywhere. There seems to be some concentrations of golden hamlets off of Nicaragua, I think. And this is a great time to when you come across some of these esoteric species, there's no information online because people are only paying attention to what other people are paying attention to, whatever's the prom queen of the week or of the month. So I had to dig up 20-something-year-old books from Scott Michael to find out more about it. Like it's crazy. Like some of these older books have really good information, and Scott Michael's Reef Fishes series. I know that book, and series of books. It's just, there's nowhere else you can find that information than in some good quality books like that.
Those books were great because there was a lot of natural history, evolution, rare, like geographic stuff. But then there was also just a lot of practical knowledge because he had been a fish keeper at some point as well, and had kept a lot of these things. So I've always admired that book, those series of books for that reason.
There's some books here that I don't pull out often, and if I'm researching a new species or piece of equipment or like a different coral, I'll do my cursory research online, but then I know which book to pull out to get the verified factual information. So Fathery's clam books are just such a great reference. Of course, there's Varen's Corals of the World, Scott Michael's Reef Fishes, and then the whole giant series of books from Rudy Kiter. Mostly just to find out like how big a fish gets, where it occurs, what depth it occurs. So yeah, kind of interesting to get two really special animals for my buddy Taka. So arigato, Taka-san. Thank you so much, my buddy. And I'll do my best to take good care of him.
I'll tell you, this will make you mad that I was such a... Well, I didn't learn until about 2 weeks ago that there were so many different variants of mystery wrasses. From different locations like Tahiti and they look different.
No.
Yeah.
I believe your research, but I've been looking at mystery wrasses for 20 freaking years. I still remember the first time I saw one, because it was such a special fish, and I have one. I think you have one, right, too?
Yeah, it's one of my all-time favorites. No, I was typically, again, even though I've kept this fish a million times, I have this weird habit when I get something, I have this habit of just researching it. Even though I've researched it a million times, I enjoy that process. And I think it was on Reef Builders. It was Lemon wrote a thing on them, and he was talking about the different, because maybe I'm misremembering it, but he obviously talked about the super rare one.
Citrinus.
Yes.
Citrinus from... You're not counting that as a mystery wrasse?
No.
Oh, okay,
but
yeah.
He highlighted that there's some variation between the different islands, and I was like, what? All this time I thought that a mystery wrasse is a mystery wrasse is a mystery wrasse. Now I'm gonna have to look that up later.
Now I'm gonna have to go reread that too, because I know they look different from juveniles and into adulthood. Going from actually striped and kind of like lavender purple. And then when they're older, they're, almost solid pink with a yellow girdle on their jaw.
Yeah, and the white
Interesting.
bars will fade, and all that. But anyway, I probably got that wrong, and the YouTube folks will probably correct me. But I'm gonna have to dig up that Reef Builders article, because I was like, wait, yeah. Anyway, so I figured you'd school me on that. Like, what?
No,
you didn't know that?
No.
So now I feel better.
No. Yeah, I'll have to dig into it. And like even just planting the idea, I'll just look at pictures from a bunch of different places. Dive photos are a good place to find that in situ information, because they'll tell you where they're diving. That's the first thing they'll tell you. Whereas specimens in the trade, they're all going to be kind of mixed up from Marshall Islands to Tahiti. I mean, we're not getting them from Tahiti. I know they occur there, and I think they have found them in as far as the Philippines once
and
in a while.
Hawaii.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah,
That's
they're all
crazy.
over the place, man. I think Japan, Hawaii. I mean, obviously not common there, but I've got a trip to Hawaii coming up now that all the things are opening up again. I was like, man, that'd be awesome if I saw a mystery wrasse.
I saw one mystery wrasse in Kwajalein in the Marshall Islands, about 130 feet.
Dang.
The water was so clear, you would have thought I was in 10 feet. Like, it was incredible. Like, I could see the multicolor angel like it was under a metal halide, but I was at 130 feet, and you could see, like, so far down because it was so freaking clear. Yeah, I miss going around and going to the source.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how's your tank doing? Because you were out of town for a little bit, we're still kind of settling in.
Yeah, it survived my first out-of-town experience. I'm loving the lights. I've run some older Kessels before, but never really gave them never put them on like a main tank. I guess other than like a little office reef tank in the past. But
the smaller Kessels are the ultimate utility light. They're just small, compact. You leave them attached to the gooseneck, and then just put them on the shelf. And when you need them, just for the refugium, for a small tank, for a frag show, or just doing some work. Yeah, ultimate utility light.
Yeah, I'm going through this weird, I even reached out to Kessel about it, because I'm like, my fish are like somebody fed them. You know how we always bought like food to enhance coloration in fish, and like enhance the reds in your fish and all that. I feel like I've been feeding my fish something, but it's the lights. As soon as I turn those lights on, I've got a screened-in porch kind of off the room that my tank is at, and so when the weather's good, I'll sit out there and the bugs leave me alone because it's screened in, and I'm further away from the tank at that point. But I mean, you can see that pink mystery wrasse cruising around. My purple dotty back just freaking glows purple. Orange redfish, I've got a pair of flame angels that are just on fire, and it's like I was missing some spectrum or something, I don't know. There's something special about those lights. I can't stop talking about it,
Well, it's when you think that your flame angel or your royal grandma or your purple dotty back or your yellow tank, if you think that they're washed out, but then you put some colorific lights on there, I don't want to act like Kessel is the only one, but
no.
they've definitely executed it in the A500X. All of a sudden you're like, oh my God, my fish aren't that pale.
Yeah, well, and you get used to oh, that's a pretty fish, and that's as good as it gets, right? It's like that as this is how my flame angel looks, and then all of a sudden you put a different light on it, and it just glows orangey red, and you're like, what the hell's going on, So,
how about the overall reefscape? How's that going?
It's going good. I have a very low aquascape, very open, so I'm not really worried about any shadowing. I like the shadowing, right? We talked about that. It creates depth. I do have, it's weird because I did pull out the par meter because I wanted to raise the lights as high as I felt comfortable, and I raised them up to about 31 inches above the water. But then, you got to dial in the intensity, and I wanted to match it with my old lights, not to stress out my corals. And I did all that with a par meter, but my Pavona is super pale. It's still got all of its green, phosphorescent color, but it's just pale. And then even a lobophytum leather coral just is like almost white. So I'm like, maybe there's some pockets of like high par that I'm missing, or maybe it's just new tank syndrome, right? It's a brand new tank, and
I mean, it might be a little clean, because I assume you use a lot of new water, but I'm experiencing something similar right now with my Reef lead 160s, where I went, what did I have on there? I had 3 Radeon Gen 4 Pros, and I had them set to a pretty low intensity. And then I took par measurements and matched it with the Red Sea 160s. And that light, the corals respond to the light color of the Red Sea Reef lead 160 as if the par is much higher than it seems. So I think what happened, and I think this might be happening in some other lights, I haven't seen that yet in the A500X, is that if you put so much of your spectral energy into one spectrum, they might be over activating chlorophyll, because it's got an absorption peak around 420, 430, I think. So if you just blast that, you're going to saturate the photosystem of just those xanthellae before the entire animal. And so it's weird. I'm seeing that also in my Red Sea lit coral flat, and again you'll see it in a couple weeks, where I think I have some stuff in the corner and it seems pretty dim, but it's just too bright. Yeah, one good example is I got some orange. I have some orange clove polyps, and I have them in the corner where they're probably getting like 50 micromoles of par. And I have another frag from the same guy that I put in one of my mid intensity lighting system, and that one's getting 100 par, and the 100 par lit orange cloves look flawless, and then the ones under the Red Sea Reef lead look very pale, very washed out. So I wonder if Red Sea just maybe overdid it a little bit, and it doesn't translate one-to-one when you're taking measurements with the par meter.
Yeah, I the other thing, and I think I told you about it, was I had not noticed on my old lights that the UV lenses had browned out.
Ooh, yes.
And so even my Blastomusa, like the green centers faded out. I had some war coral, right, favites with the green centers, and that coral just went full red over time. And I at the time I didn't think anything of why all that GFP, is it green fluorescent protein? Is that what it is? Was bailing. But then when I started reading about what spectrum range it was, when I moved tanks, that's when I noticed, right, because you're handling those fixtures, and I'm like, oh, hey, look at that. And then here come the Kessels, right? And I obviously cranked up the UV on those. So maybe I should also dial back the UV, kind of like, hey, you haven't had this in a while. It's kind of like too much medicine. I got to work you up to it or something. But that could also play like, I don't know. I think you're right, though. I think, one, it's a full, like, there are spectral differences, right, in these lights. And then maybe certain things fade out over time, and I like those UVs, right? And the corals are like, whoa, hey, hold on a second. So, I don't know.
Little UV goes a long way. I was able to resolve some of the broader bleaching, because I also have, some thin-branched red montiporas and some anacropora and some monopora caps that at first they were like really pale. And it wasn't until I really started pounding the tank with nitrates and then feeding the fish a lot more to get some phosphates that a lot of those guys perked up, not just in that system, but across all my systems. I don't know if I communicated that in my interview with Reef Bum. I'm just like, I've tried feeding so much, and it just made the tank really dirty, and now I'm just basically dosing about, at least 5 ppm a week for all my systems.
I should do that.
I don't know if it's the answer is to keep it high or to let the coral consume it, right? I'm not sure if there's a difference between keeping the levels at 5 and then bumping up to 10, or letting the levels go to 0, but I'm still adding 5 ppm's worth a week, right? Like, does it need to stay in solution all the time? So still a lot of interesting questions to be answered and discovered in the reef aquarium hobby.
Yeah, that's the thing about dosing, right? It's like you're measuring what hasn't been consumed. So when it's at a fixed level over the period of a month, that's probably good, and it shows that there's always something available. But to your point, you could be at zero, but that really, like, what you're dosing is just being consumed, and that's all that it needs. And especially something like a nutrient that could cause other problems if you overdose it, it almost might be better to just not shoot for like a testable value, but shoot for like observational dosing. Like, okay, when I dose at 5 ppm, everything looks happy, even though my test kit says I'm running on empty.
All my corals look happy, but the only corals that lost color, like really noticeably, would be some of my highest light corals. You know, like they darkened up, right? And in some corals, it looks amazing, right? Your Lytostellas and your Microclados, and a lot of staghorns, you know, perked up. But my Humulus, they're super efficient, super high light, super clean reef kind of corals, and they have noticeably darkened, because I had one that was like really baby blue. I had it for months, and I'm not sure whether I let the nutrients go down or if I just put a little spotlight, because I kind of have them together. So I'm really tossing around the idea of taking a slightly used Kessel A360X and just using the narrow angle reflector and just create like this nice little bright light zone just for the Humulus. I mean, everything around them can handle a little bit more light, but I know the Humulus can just give, they'll take everything you can throw at them.
Oh yeah, that's a tough coral, man. Are you having good success with it?
Yeah. I mean, I've got it. It's basically my like flow breaker, right? I have a let's see, Aquabee up 8,000.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, it's literally the brake, the wave brake. The Aquabee up 8,000. It's coming out of a clover nozzle, and the water is basically crashing over 4 different colonies of Humulus. I don't know. My green one could be a Gemifera, because it has like really thick branches, and it's bright neon green, like really, really cool. But they're just so short and fat and close together, it doesn't look like the other 3 Humulus.
That's always been a cool idea of tank for me, like those type of reef crest corals that just take a beating and have those dense branches like those guys, and then just have like a massive surge going through it. There's a guy like
surge, massive light, low nutrients. That's one for sure that I would keep if I did a tank dedicated to like that section of the reef. I would keep it low nutrients, but make sure it was consistently or continuously dosed.
Yeah, I kept those. I think it was a Gemifera a long time ago under Iwasaki's, and it did okay for a while. But I think back in the MaxiJet Powerhead days, it just was a lost cause.
Oh my God, dude! I still remember your tank of the month in 2001. Did you have a Waukee on the return pump and like try to create some flow with some MaxiJets in the tank?
It was something like that. Yeah. I think I used a Mag like 12 or something, like a Mag 18. But
because your metal halide lid tank wasn't warm enough.
No, yeah. And I lived in an apartment, and I was scared of leaks. And
I'll bet you didn't have dinoflagellates back then.
Nope.
The light is literally too bright for dinos. That's
dinos are like, I'm out.
I'm out.
It's just funny, right? Like, but oh God. Pusillipora, is it Varicosa? The real chunky Pusillipora. I got some of that from you.
The chunkiest would be like Meandrina, and then chunkier than that is a Duxie.
Okay. Like this was that big chunky, like what you'd see in Hawaii, I guess, as well. But hot pink. I had one of those, and it just didn't grow. And I think it was probably flow related.
I'll bet you it was nutrients.
That could be
bet you it was nutrients, because
we were all
I have a few pieces
sandbedding it, and
we were all just going to war on nutrients. But I have a few different Meandrinas and one Varicosa. But man, one of my Varicosas is turning into a Damicornis.
Oh, really?
Like
it's
when
like
you
adjusting to the current and saying, all right, I'm going to go slightly smaller.
No, that's one colony that is not in very high flow. It's got pretty good flow. But I'm actually in the process. I'm going to be adding some, like a giant light bar over my 3 tanks, the 2 foot, 3 foot, to 4 foot. So just one large common light bar, because when you use mounting arms for lights, you're kind of limited to what the manufacturer has, says you can do with it, right? So, one example is the Radeon mounting system. It's at a fixed height, and that's what you get. you know and I almost want to get my lights higher and get more even light distribution. And then there's a lot of cool LED strip lights. I mean, I already have a stack, and I was thinking about how to install it on one tank and then install it on the other tank and then the other tank. I'm like, you know what, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to install one giant light bar, and then everything can just hang. It'll be super nice and clean.
Yeah, I mean,
so I'm in the process of adding more light to where that pause port is, so hopefully it'll pink up. And even if it does pink up, though, like the branches right now, if somebody gave me a frag of this, I would swear up and down it was pause port and cornice. But I know for a fact that it came from a meandering Varicose kind of deal.
So it's not the growth form; it's more like the coloration. You're seeing like is starting to be Damacornis style, or maybe I misinterpreted.
No, it was hot pink.
Yeah.
And I guess it's maybe in lesser flow and lesser light now, so it's greenish. It's got that like base coat of green.
Of green with like
really
pink.
Green.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not as important when you first set up a tank, right? You shouldn't necessarily set up a tank with all the lights you're ever going to need, because your corals are small and they're not shading themselves and they're not shading each other. But definitely now in a couple of the tanks, as I'm packing them a little bit more densely and they're growing in, there's more self-shading and shading of other corals. So it's definitely to the point where adding some strip lights is going to be beneficial for the corals, and it's going to make the overall presentation of the tank that much better.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm still shocked that I'm at, I think, about 31 inches above the water line, and I had to turn the those A500s down to like 65% intensity, which in my brain means, well, if I've got room to increase intensity, that means I can go higher, right? But I've got, with all the travel and everything else, I'm like, yeah, that'll be maybe like a fall project or something when it's crappy outside and I need something to do.
Well, speaking of SPS corals, man, did you see the story this morning about the Solomon Island millipores?
Something about unique coral. I haven't read it yet, though.
So unique corals and Tim Kelly have been working on basically an export business in the Solomon Islands, and it's really hard. Imagine just trying to go to a government office and get the paperwork, but it takes like 2 weeks because somebody's out of town or somebody's that's not in that day. They have they're open like 3 or 4 hours a day, so and then if you catch them open, you might have to wait in line. So it's just really, really hard, and I've been chipping away at this for like, God, it's going to be 3 years at the end of this summer, and Tim's actually going to be out here a few weeks after you. And I think they finally hit a stride where they're getting kind of small shipments every week. And God, seeing those millies again, just, people are super hot for the Acropora tenuis, but millies, man, that's the original tenuis, right?
Yep.
I mean, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, we always knew like that was a coral to strive for. And then, all the different colors, like, gold, orange, red, pink, blue, green, and then they'll have, a lot of times they'll have a greenish base, colored tips, colored tentacles, and then just like a gradient all along the way. And it's just super neat to see like 5 pink millies from Solomon Islands. Every one of them's different.
Yeah.
Underwater, you don't even see that underwater, right? But under their aquarium conditions with aquarium lighting, and you can scrutinize them a little bit better. Oh my lord. So those are the corals. The reason I love the millies is, obviously they have cool shape, crazy awesome polyp extension. They grow fast, man. They really can grow fast.
Yeah.
But it's one of those corals you can appreciate up close and far away.
Yeah. It's got the intense color, but then up close you can see the delicate details. The way the corallites are structured is super cool. And they're furry, man. They got polyp extension out the wazoo. Yeah,
I saw like a spawning tank in Singapore 5 or 6 years ago where they were feeding the coral so much that they gave it oh my God, they had to change all the tank water like twice a week. Like they were feeding it so much baby brine shrimp. It was kind of crazy. They were so shaggy, man, you could not tell what kind of coral it was. Like it didn't even look like an acro anymore. It just looked like a fuzzball. It was insane.
There's been sometimes, yeah, like certain like frozen foods that even when I used to keep them, like I would add them, and like some of the oily foods, man, like the polyps would just get almost stringy at times.
Yeah,
You know, where you're
gets
like, what is
super
going
duper
on
long.
with that coral? That's my all-time favorite acropora is the milliporas.
If Acropora millipora was the last acro I was ever able to grow, right? If like they're like, okay, you're rationed to one acropora for the rest of your life, I'm like, I'd be happy with an Acropora millipora
Agreed.
forever.
Yeah.
Very nice. So yeah, it's super cool to see Unique Corals making some progress with the Solomon Islands, because it's not just harvesting the corals. I mean, there's a lot of legalese. Then you have to figure out, how to pack them, how to ship them, how to hold them. Like, there's a huge learning curve of dealing with wild corals from scratch, and I think they're finally starting to nail it. And hope maybe in the future we'll get some new wild colonies of purple monster or other types of
I was
monsters.
going to ask, have they started bringing in the purple monster again? Because I remember when you took a trip, I think with Tim, right?
Yep.
You guys collected some.
Yeah, I have one tiny little encrusted spat that I'm really hoping will respond to my boosted nutrients, because I've managed not to kill it for like 6 years. It's
Yeah.
embarrassing, except that it's not dead. I still have it.
It's not embarrassing with the purple monster, because that's got to be the slowest growing acropora ever. I mean, it's
I've only seen a couple places where someone had it dialed in, and
Yeah.
it was like, whoa. Michael Moye, he had like a two-handed chunk. It didn't even look real anymore, until I saw him out in the wild, and you're just like, wow. But interesting segue is that when Tim and I went to Solomon Islands, I don't know, the umpteenth time, we were looking for the purple monster, which we found. We were looking for branching moon, Astralogyra, one of your first corals, stonies, and we were looking for another coral that I had seen in books called Acropora multiacuta. And I've never seen it. I've never found it. Vincent came across some in Sulawesi or Manado or something in central Indonesia, and he thought it looked like a raggedy colony because it just, it was there and you could tell what it was, but it just didn't look right. And I'm getting indications that they have collected one colony of this multiacuta, and it basically looks, to my eyes so far, it looks like a Suharsenoi where someone's broken off the branches. Where it's like long tapering, axial coralites, but they end bluntly.
That's
so weird. So freaking weird. And so we've always called it a unicorn coral for two things. One, each branch just basically looks like a horn, especially the way it's cut off. And two, it's been so hard to find, even like going out and looking for it. The weird thing is, it looks like a deep water, but it's a super shallow water coral. It's only known from like really shallow places, and so I'm very excited to see what a highlight, smooth-skinned, naked acro looks like, and how it does in an aquarium. That's gonna be fun. I might have it here by the time you come next week.
Oh, that'd be cool.
It's supposed to be landing at Unique tomorrow, Thursday. So that's, this is one of those ways that like learning the species, the real species names of corals helps you, do, Google Scholar searches and skim the scientific literature for more information about golden hamlets or tabling staghorns or unicorn acros, right? This is why the species names matter, and I think some of these animals are a perfect example of that.
Yeah, I imagine there's some listeners. I mean, even on that last one, I'm going to be going to Varen's site and looking it up, right? But it's like, that's like I said, even though I've kept something a million times, I love to pull the books out and I love to Google and just read people's experiences, because sometimes things change too, right? But I mean, that's how you learn, right? You're like, what the hell is Jake talking about? All right, let me go Google this thing, let me go read about it. And now it's in here, it's in there forever.
Well, I started reading, the Corals of the World books when I was like 17. I think that's when they came out in 2001, and maybe 18. And I didn't understand what I was reading, right? And some of the stuff in Scott Michael's books, when you read it with a new lens, you absorb more information, right? So I still refer to Daniel Knopp's clam book. I still refer to Fathery's clams books. And yeah, no, there's only a few paragraphs in Coral of the World on every coral. I've reread them so many times throughout the years of the corals that I like. And yeah, there's no shame and there's nothing wrong with rereading something and just, understanding the information that's being presented a lot more.
Yeah, it's also fun to pick out like a country that does not have any collection or exports, and then like start to figure out like what the hell lives and grows there, and like like then you suddenly learn like there's a wrasse there that like for instance the mystery wrasse discussion we had, like there's a morph of a wrasse there, or there's a coral there that only occurs there, and it's fun too when you misidentify a coral because you're like, oh yeah, that's what my coral looks like, and you're like, well, wait a minute, it's from this little island, and I know they don't export from there, so I know I got that wrong.
A perfect example is Acan maxima.
Yep.
Acan maxima, which was redescribed as sclerophilia, first of all, is only from the Red Sea, and it's just kind of embarrassing, that people went around and called certain coral Acan maxima and just never bothered. No one ever bothered to just double check, to verify. I'm like, this coral's literally only known from the Red Sea, right? It's not like it has a range to the Maldives or to the Seychelles or to the Eastern Indian Ocean, and maybe there's some waves that they don't know about. No, it's way over there. We have never seen Acan maxima, and from what I've seen from the photographs, they're probably really ugly. So yeah. If anybody wants to look it up, it's multiacuta, just like it sounds, like Hooked on Phonics. Just phonetically spell it out, multiacuta. And I'll be doing some stories on reef builders in the coming days on the Tutuilensis and the Golden Hamlet and the unicorn acro. So yeah, just stay tuned on reef builders, and we'll stay on top of it. Oh man! So I definitely want to wrap up this conversation, talking about the people that inspired us in the aquarium hobby. But I think there's one big topic that I think our listeners are dying to hear our point of view.
Oh, I'm gonna take a guess.
Yeah, go for it.
The fact that Marine Depot is now bulk resupply.
Yeah, bulk resupply. They acquired Marine Depot, and this is not like when Ecotech Marine and Aqualumination merged, right? That happened over 5 years ago, 6-7 years ago, and those two companies operate together now. It's one company with two brands and two locations, so it's not like that. Marine Depot will no longer exist. I have talked to a few people who said they want to just put in like an order just for a sentimental sake. They just want to get a sentimental last order for Marine Depot. That'd be funny too, like if in the last couple of weeks they just started throwing a bunch of tchotchkes, just like Marine Depot shirts and like keychains and stickers, and just get that stuff out there just while you still can.
Yeah, I mean maybe it's a little too much to call it an institution, but it's been around forever, So I think a lot of us grew up in our reef keeping history with them at the forefront of online ordering.
You and I are older than that, man. I remember when Marine Depot was a little scrappy upstart from California, and Custom Aquatic was the jam. Yep. Do you remember Custom Aquatic?
I do.
And then before that, it was, I think that fish place had a much stronger, because it was physical catalog presence. And before that, there was, Debron Aquatics. And so
Debron, yeah. They were based out of Denver, weren't they?
Yep. The store technically still exists.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there was like a Pets Warehouse that had like a crazy catalog.
Yeah, Pets Warehouse and a few others. So I don't know. I think because of seeing this progression of companies, rise and dominate and then fall, I'm less anxious about it. Granted, I think the mechanisms that are going on right now with tens of millions of dollars of financial backing from a venture capital group sets a different tone, and I think that's what has a lot of people are nervous about it.
I I don't know. I mean, I think to have like a strong emotional reaction about it is probably overkill.
Mm-hmm.
Um, my concerns, but like I'm not going to lose sleep over these things, is one is more personally selfish, and that's Marine Depot had distribution out of Athens, Georgia. So when I would place an order, and I remember I
Mm-hmm.
stumbled upon this because I was loyal to ordering them from them in the past, and I'm like, all right, that thing's got to ship from California. I got to be patient. And then all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden I ordered something from them, and it was like there the next day, and I was like, what the hell? And then
What
I
the
saw the
heck?
address, and then I learned about that they had those multiple distribution centers. So I hope that bulk resupply continues to, I guess, honor or like follow that type of
I
distribution model.
think they already hinted that they won't,
Yeah, so that
because
sucks.
they have such a large distribution facility in Minnesota. Um, they didn't explicitly say anything, but I think they hinted that they have such infrastructure up in Minnesota
Yeah.
already. It doesn't really make sense in the overall scheme of the company. But I think for the consumer, it's going to be just fine, right?
Yeah.
If this was going on like 20 years ago, and we didn't have nearly this much global connectivity with our social groups and social media, a company like that, first of all, there's map pricing for everything, so I'm not worried about pricing to the consumers, right? That stuff is going to just stay super rock solid, like that's set by the manufacturers. That's not a big deal. But 10 to 20 years ago, a juggernaut company could have squashed ideas. They could have said, yeah, you know what, we don't want to carry that. That's a little too risky.
Well,
We
that's
don't
where I
want
was
to
going
stock
to
it.
go on the second point is like some of these companies that have creative ideas that are trying to build momentum, once you start to have these like larger companies, and I'm not going to call them a monopoly because they're not, right? There's plenty
No.
of other vendors out there still, but if bulk reef supply decides to pass on your product, that might not be such a good thing. So there's concern there, and hopefully they don't. Hopefully, I mean they all the people that are at least that we get exposed to on the bulk reef supply side. Via their social media, they all seem really passionate. So I don't see them doing that, right? If somebody comes up with something
And
interesting and
I've
cool,
actually
they're
seen
going to
the
check it
opposite.
out.
I've actually seen the opposite with bulk resupply. Like I've run into the team at Interzoo and pointed out a couple really off the wall product, and months later I find out that bulk resupply is now was for a while they took a gamble on Thieling, which had one of the first kind of commercially available roll filters. And they did that for a while, but I think that model just wasn't great for like dropping into a sump. But they took a chance, right? So they did that. So I don't think bulk reef supply is so big that they can squash companies or squash ideas or upstarts, of someone who wants to come up in the market. Because I mean, God, you can reach your audience, right? You've got some really off the wall brands, or just like Nanobox Reef crushed it for a long time until a whole slew of second-hand lights just basically undermine his old business model. You've got Refi, those are American-made lights. He's doing just fine. He doesn't need to sell thousands of lights a month
Yeah.
to keep his staff going. There's a lot of upstart companies, and you got Kickstarter, and you got Facebook groups, and there's 3D printing, and so a lot of that, the novelty is being decentralized. And so I'm not super worried about innovation. But on the flip side, bulk reef supply does have the size to put companies on the map, and to put certain companies on the map, and to help drive the discussion. And from what we've seen, for the most part, you and I are not shouting at our screens when we watch their videos. There's always maybe a more accurate way to do things.
Yeah.
But by and large, man, I think they're sharing pretty freaking good information.
Yeah, I think that I think anybody, I've had some minor beef with some of their videos, but at the same rate, I try to take 10 steps back and think about the greater good, and look at like what they are putting out there. I don't like that sometimes they come off like they're being scientific and they're doing scientific experiments when
That's a fair point. That's a fair point right there. In the name of science, I'm like, yeah, no, that's not science.
But they also are willing to course correct, like the whole UV sterilizer thing. They were like, "Hey, running 2 UVs at different flows, yeah, that's dumb. Sorry, guys," and they
I
took
didn't
it
even
back.
see that. What the heck was that?
Well, because there's an ideal flow for parasites, and there's an ideal flow for what they believe would be good for like algae control, right? I don't know what they did. They ran some tests and they were like, like there's like an immediate difference, but then like 6 months later, it's all a wash. But I gave him credit for backtracking on that and saying, hey, we were wrong, right? Where like a skeptic could say, well, hey, if they convince you to buy 2 UV sterilizers, that's good for them. So I give them credit for that kind of thing.
That's a cheap argument, right? Of course, it's a for-profit business. So is Reef Builders. And it's very unimaginative to come to the first basic conclusions that you can, right? Sure, they want to sell more stuff, but they've shown themselves not to be driven by that.
No, they're definitely hobbyists, true and true. And I like my only concern is, and you're right, because they also have the capacity to boost the sales of like a small shop if they're really excited about a product. But like, I saw a video where he was really excited about, remember the Sea Swirls? And he had reached out to the guy that makes those and was like, man, I want to start selling these on bulk Reef Supply. And the guy's like, I just build these, like I build these at a small volume. Like I don't want to have to scale up for bulk Reef Supply levels, right? Like, cause I think if you sell something at bulk Reef Supply, you probably need to up your volume, your output of manufacturing and
pallets and containers.
Yeah. And so, but in this day and age, to your point, these guys do just fine with their own websites. They can sponsor on a forum. I think even things like PayPal and Tile really like took a lot of that out of the equation, where anybody can accept payments of any form. So yeah, I don't think they're a monopoly. I don't think they're gonna steer the ship of the hobby, and we're gonna have a pre-bulk reef supply and post-bulk reef supply
eras.
Yeah. I think people probably overreact a bit on that.
As a content creator of like 13 years, we have 13,000 articles on Reef Builders. We make mistakes. I've given a ton of talks and I do a bunch of videos. And if I do 100 videos in 1 year, I guarantee you there's a few of them I'll step back and be like, oh, well, I don't know if I still agree with what I said literally months ago, right? A lot of this is fluid. You can always say, if someone's putting their neck out there and speaking up, there's just someone's going to be looking out for that gotcha. Oh, no, that's not right. I'm the worst when it comes to species IDs, but I feel like that's important. So that one's a little different. But yeah, if you create 1,000 videos, I don't know how many they're up to, there's going to be a few that not everyone agrees with. And I'm sure some of them, they're like, oh, you're a little bit off on that. But they're trying, they're being creative. And, I don't think that mail order is bigger than in-store retail. That's how I really feel, right? I don't feel like they're anywhere close to a monopoly. Maybe getting close and headed that direction in the online space, but the vast majority of the goods are sold at stores, man. So if you have any reservations about what's happening in the online retail space, support your local fish store. Right?
I was going to say the exact same thing. It's like, if I need something and I know my local store has it, I'm bound to go get it. There is that passive shopping where I can kind of like, well, I'm at work, I can't hop in the car and go to the fish store, but I can place an order and it'll be here in a few days, and that's just hyper convenient for me because now I don't have to fit into my schedule hopping in my car and going to that fish store. But God, like from a nostalgic perspective, like some of the looking back at the hobby and being a kid and being a teenager and being a 20-something, like going to the local fish store was like part of it, man. Like, it wasn't just that you needed to buy a replacement pump. It's like, oh, what corals did they get this week? Or, what's in
you and me and a couple guys used to meet up on Saturdays, every Saturday. It was like our impromptu little reefer club. And we'd compare notes and we'd share notes. And so, in a good, thriving reef shop, you shouldn't just be talking to the employees and the owner. You should be talking to some of the other folks and faces that you see there on a regular basis, because you'd be surprised how close they might live to you, and someone who might be able to help you out with some spare equipment or trade some frags or, take an overgrown fish off your hands. So, the real reef scene is in person. That's the real reef world. That's why the reef shows are so fun, because like if you're there and you see any other reefer there, you have the same motivations to be there.
Yep.
Right. And so like the Reef Aquarium conference is basically, you know, the Reef Aquarium store experience times 100.
Agreed. Yeah. And I mean, I get there's people that live in areas where maybe there isn't a local fish store, or their local fish store isn't so great. You know, I'm very fortunate. I have an amazing local reef store, saltwater, dedicated to saltwater reef, right, and marine fish. It's an awesome store. Their dry goods are great. So I'm super lucky. Like, something goes wrong with my tank, I can go there the next day and or buy exactly what I need, you know, and that's sometimes a huge plus. You know? Sometimes,
because, man, you know, I go to a bunch of different stores. I don't have a specific one. We don't have like one mega store like you have with Fury. But every now and then, man, I just need some airline or some rigid tubing or an air pump or things that are or filter floss, things that should be super basic, and they won't have it in stock, and they'll give me, you know, the offensive reply, oh, I can order that for you. You know, so we're not here to say like every reef store is, you know, a slice of heaven.
Yeah.
Definitely, all retail stores should always be hustling, right? Not just, like, you got to keep a ton of inventory on the shelves, right? And I think that's where the reef stores have done really well, is they stock a ton of corals, they stock a ton of fish and inverts. They'll have at least a few tanks for you, and lots of gear, always in stock, or, you know, very soon, unless they just recently ran out. And so that's one of the things that really separates the average fish store from, you know, a higher upscale reef store or aquarium store. But yeah, honestly, having some rigid airline tubing in your store should not be that exotic.
It's not that expensive to throw on the shelf.
Yeah, man, I know you won't sell that much, but the one time that I come into your shop and I need it and you have it, I will remember that. I will absolutely remember that. So, you know, so this is also not really that different from when the internet started. You know, internet sales really took off, because I worked retail, and back then all the aquarium stores thought that their future was doomed.
Yeah.
But there's probably more aquarium stores today than there ever was, and there's a lot more saltwater aquarium stores than there ever has been.
Yeah, I mean, I was guilty of I don't buy a lot of coral. You know, I'm a pretty boring guy. I keep like the same old corals I've been growing for like 20 years.
It's okay. You come out next week, I'm gonna hook you up, brother.
But I'm probably not a good local fish store customer, because I don't buy a lot. But, you know, like that mystery you're asked, and that's not to.
But how many people have you sent there?
A lot, probably.
Yeah.
I wrote about them, and yeah, I hope so. I hope. I mean, they deserve it, you know. But I was just casually talking with the owner, George, about mystery wrasses, and he's like, yeah, I haven't seen them in a while, and blah, 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 blah. And then 2 days later, he emails me. He's like, man, I see them on the list. You want me to order you one? And I was like, yeah.
Yes,
and then he orders 2. I drive in, and he's like, here's the 2, man. This one's feeding really good. He's a little bit bigger. This one's the Mac Daddy, right? And I was like, I'll take that one, you know? Such a good user, like such a good customer experience, that I was like, man, I need to really, if I'm in the mood to buy coral, that's where I need to go, you know?
Yeah. So, because you never know what's going to speak to you.
Yeah.
Right? You can see the pictures, you can look in the books, but when you see it in real life, like, all right, you'd never buy a Pavona based on a photograph, right? Just a regular hairy Pavona decussata. But when you see them in real life, like the right shape and the right, you know, colony, you're like, oh my goodness, that is so freaking interesting.
Yeah,
so
and if
freaking neat.
I mean, maybe I'm getting too philosophical here, but I think when you're if you're in a fish store and you're looking at a bunch of stuff and something speaks to you, I think you're being true to yourself and what interests you more than when you're on Instagram and the hype machine is just inundating you, and you're like, I think I want a $500 torch coral, you know? But like when you're in a fish store, you're like, man, those bright orange mushrooms like on that rock look phenomenal, man. I'm gonna get those, you know? And all of a sudden you're happy with your decision because you bought what you liked, not what other people told you to like. So there's that too. But yeah. Deep thoughts.
I think I'm actually, you know what, so I think that the I am most interested in is that Bulk Reef Supply, they really have their finger on the pulse of the reef aquarium hobby, right? They were the first company to bring in an automatic filter roll, and even though that didn't pan out, like, they are willing to take risks. So I think one of the coolest things that they're going to be acquiring with the Marine Depot purchase is the Aquamax brand. And JNS is the manufacturer out of Taiwan, or at least they have been in the past. Like I know they don't make the lights, but the brand is ripe for explosion, man. So I'm really excited to see some Aquamax filter rolls, some Aquamax pumps, some Aquamax. I mean, they already have protein skimmers, but their lights, like I use their lights. I use them on my fish tank. It's like super slim, passively cooled. It's not wireless or anything, but it's basically controllable, and it's just enough for my fish tank. But I also use some smaller Aquamax strip. It's not really like a strip in typical sense because it's really thin and a little bit wider, but super silent, super versatile. Man, I freaking love them. So Bulk Reef Supply, Ryan, I know you're listening. We're looking forward to see what you do with the Aquamax brand, because Bulk Reef Supply started off with bulk goods, right? Their own products basically for reef aquarium medias and additives, and so in this sense they're going to be kind of getting back to their roots. So okay, maybe we lose a vendor, but we gain a more committed manufacturer. And as a reef tech blogger, man, that's one of the things that excites me the most.
Yeah, speaking of Aquamax, man, I love their little media reactors. I don't get why every media reactor is like this tall. I'm like, I just need a cup of carbon, y'all.
Yeah.
And then, but I love, like, they've got the one where it's like the little pumps underneath and it just pops off. You walk over to the sink with it, you empty it, refill it, and pop it back on the pump. And I'm like, this is brilliant.
Yeah, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit for Aquamax brand to kind of change the status quo and just bring introduce a lot more common sense into the reef aquarium.
They did, man. Their skimmer cups had handles on them. When your skimmer cup is this freaking wide and you're like, man, if I spill this on the carpet, I'm dead meat. It's got a cup.
It's got a handle.
It's got a handle, man.
Big
that was solid gold. I was like, that's brilliant. And even when you have to untwist it, where you're like, you're trying to untwist it, but then the whole thing moves and you're cussing at it because of the O-ring. You can hold it and you just grab that little handle and twist. And I was like, man, why is this not on every skimmer? So lots of credit to Aquamax for some good ideas.
Yeah, no, very much looking forward to that. And like I said, I think the overall internet would have been a greater threat to the retail space 20 years ago. But I mean, the real market is the physical retail stores, and I'm going to keep going to my retail store and finding products that I didn't remember I needed, and corals and fish that I didn't know I wanted.
Yep, and I mean, the good ones continue to do well. If you walk into a fish store and it's a mess and everything looks nasty and you feel like you're breathing in black mold, you're going to go online, but if you have a good experience and you build a relationship with your local store, you're going to want to keep going there, right? Because it's a social fix, it's fun, it personifies the whole reef hobby.
Yeah, so absolutely. So
I'm not worried about that.
We'll definitely be watching this space, and I think it's probably mostly for the best. And this kind of a stronger competition will weed out some of the riffraff and just make everybody else stronger.
Agreed.
All right. So now I would like to talk about the people who've inspired us in the reef aquarium hobby and in the aquarium hobby in general. And I think it's only fitting that you kick it off.
Yeah, so the reason I couldn't join Jake for a podcast last week was because my dad's been battling cancer a long time, and he passed away this weekend, so we were by his side. But that got Jake and I talking about, the role of our parents in our passions, in our hobbies. Good parents help stimulate that. My dad was not a reef hobbyist, but it's funny, I talked to my mom about it a bit as well, and growing up, he was not allowed to have any pets, right? His parents were like, no pets. So, he told my mom when they got married, like, first thing I want to do is get a dog, But he did have apparently a little water garden going on back in Holland back in the day when he was younger, and he would catch freshwater eels, which us Dutch people love to eat. And he'd just catch all kinds of, anyone that's been to Holland knows there's what we call sloats, or creeks everywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you could just go back there and you could get all kinds of aquatic plants like kabamba and elodia and stuff growing like crazy in there, and bitterlings, if anybody knows what those are, that like lay their
Mm-hmm.
eggs in mussels. And so apparently he was doing that, and I'm like, well, that explains where I got that from, you know. But never gave me a hard time about my hobby, my tanks, leaks, right? I had a big
You're always going to be
saltwater
making messes,
aquarium.
especially when you're young. Like,
Yeah.
you're not prioritizing the cleanliness factor.
Yeah, and they were supportive of that, you know. Like, it's not like I had to keep it all up in my bedroom. There was a big old saltwater aquarium in the living room at one house, and another house that was in the basement, but that's where I hung out, you know. So,
Mm-hmm.
but it's just it got me thinking too about myself. Like, my kids are not into my hobbies, at least not yet. But whatever they do get into, like, I just got to have that same approach, right? No matter what the mess is, if it does damage to my house or whatever, like, just let them do it, because you never know where that ends up, right?
Right.
So as those kids grow.
I can say for a fact I would not be doing anything like what I'm doing now if it wasn't for my mother. You know, she came home. She came home one day when I was like 13. So yeah, we always had like a couple bowls here and like a like radiator slider and a couple of guppies. I don't really count that as like the beginning of my aquarium keeping experience, right? Because that would be all my life. But it's when I really started paying attention. So she came home one day, kind of an impulse buy, and had I think it was like a 30-gallon tank with 3 white veil tails and 3 black moor goldfish, and I think all but one died within a few weeks, because we didn't know nothing about nothing. Like, just the most clueless non-aquarist ever. And very quickly you learned about the nitrogen cycle and better filters than the little bubble up thing we were doing, because goldfish are produce a lot of waste. And oh man, within 3 to 4 months, we must have had like 10 tanks, and within a year, I had 20 tanks, like everywhere, because, this fish ate that fish, and so we had to give him his own tank. And then the tilapia buttacophori was like so mean, I kept him in like a tub by himself. He was still super cool. And then, I had my African cichlid tank, and I didn't set up one saltwater tank. I set up 2 at the same time. So 29 and a 30-gallon right next to each other. I think we bought them off the Trader, which is like a printed classified ad, and that was our jam. That was like us like scanning for stuff. And I think I had a Lee's bubble up, Lee's air driven protein countercurrent protein skimmer in there. And yeah, just started snapping up all the magazines and reading about everything. And man, I had my first zebra pleco within about a year, and just went all the way, just all the freaking way. And I guess when kids are teenagers, they're looking for something. They're looking for something to be into besides girls or video games or cars or drugs. And I wasn't into any of those things. I think back then we're still only talking about like Super Nintendo, and I played those at my friend's house or whatever. But I wasn't like just totally absorbed by it. But when I got into aquariums, man, like any book I wanted, she'd always take me to the library. We drove to every store in like a 3-state area. By the time I was 14, I'd visited every fish store in Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and a little bit in Kentucky. And it was just, I have my first hot magnum, the first filter I ever bought, educated purchase, was an Emperor 400, and the second one was a Hot Magnum 250. I still have my Marineland Hot Magnum 250. It doesn't have a button on the outside. The impeller's long since gone. I haven't used it in a long time, but I still have it. But just the support that was offered to me in that regard is just, that's priceless, man, because now it's my life, my entire lifestyle. It's shaped our friendship. It's provided us with reef therapy. I've traveled around the world on this ticket of visiting aquarium people and aquarium places and reef places, and I know a lot of people can relate.
Yeah, it's like that butterfly effect, right? The little flaps its wings, and what does it turn into? But it's crazy. My dad, we moved around a lot. I think we moved on average every 2.5 years. We had some long stints in certain places. But because of his job as a civil engineer, we were in the Middle East, right? So we're we're jamming in the Red Sea and Persian Gulf stuff. And before I was born, they lived in the Bahamas. But so what's funny is, like, we were picking up stuff off the beach, and that washes ashore after storms and stuff, and we're collecting shells. And then you get older and you get in the reef hobby, and you're like, holy crap, that's a cone shell. And then we've got like tridacnate shells this big, and all of that was just like in my house. It just cracks me up. But yeah, you talked about like books and publications. Like when I wanted my FAMA subscription or Aquarium Fish Magazine subscription, no question, just go for it,
Yep.
So yeah, it definitely makes me think of like how much he influenced, even just, I mean, obviously, given it was so recent, I'm thinking about a lot of things about him and how he shaped my life. But, since this is about the hobby, of course, like, I definitely thought about that as well, of just, like, how much of a profound influence somebody like that can have. And, I mean, the lesson there for me is, like, I got 2 kids, and I got to, dude, if they want to keep reptiles, which I don't like. No, I don't.
I think you could get down with some turtles.
Yeah, I mean, we did have we had a bearded
easy.
dragon for a while, because my daughter wanted one. I mean, I've never said no to that stuff, but like, just whatever they're into, just go for it. Just I have a European friend who didn't know squat about baseball, was so excited to teach his kid about soccer, and the kid just got stoked on baseball, and he's like, I guess I'm learning baseball, and now the dude loves baseball. So your kids also broaden your horizons too, right? So
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, no, I think this is a condolences on your father, but you're a good strapping young man, and I think you'll do well.
Same.
Yeah, definitely shout out to my mom and your dad, and I'm sure everyone has someone in the hobby that they started young that really had a huge influence on their experience of being in the reef aquarium or aquarium hobby or other hobbies. So
yeah,
definitely let them know what they've done for you so that they know.
Yeah, and spend as much time as you can with them, because especially with all the COVID stuff that happened too, that was pretty crazy. And I know people lost a lot of loved ones, but you just don't know how much time you have somebody, so it's a good reminder just to do that, to spend time with them.
Absolutely. Cool. Well, I think on that note, this has been a great renewed session of reef therapy, and I think our next one we're going to do it not live, but you and I in the same room, and we're going to have 2 different cameras, and maybe we'll shoot. I have no idea what to do other than walk you around, show you some corals, but we'll sit down and talk about something interesting, something a little bit special. So if you guys watching this on YouTube have any suggestions, make sure to pop those down in the comments. Don't forget that Reef Therapy is available through all the major podcatching networks, Spotify, Google Play, and the Apple Store. And thanks a lot, Mark, for this another session of Reef Therapy, and we'll see everybody next week.
Thanks, Jake, and I'm super excited about next week. It's like I got my golden ticket to the chocolate factory, so I'm looking forward to it.
Well, you look in your reef tank and make sure you have plenty of room, because I am going to pile it on you like way more than you can handle, I'm sure.
I have a hard time saying no to you, and that's what I'm afraid of. Is like I don't want any acropore, I don't want any SBS, I want to keep it softy, and I'll be on the flight home like, God damn it, like got a bunch of SBS.
I have no problem giving you more than you can handle and having you just kind of toss things to other folks that in the local area. Maybe even kick back a frag for George Medina.
Shout out to George.
Shout out to George and Pure Reef in Alpharetta, Georgia. All right, Mark, great talking to you again, and I'll see you next week, brother.
Sounds good, man. Thanks.
All right.